On the phone with us this morning, 1st District Congressman Tracy Mann. Good morning, Congressman.
Good morning, Nick. How are you this morning?
I'm good so far. So the big news out of Washington is that they say there's a deal on gun control legislation on the Senate side. Do you know anything about what that looks like, or do you not get to really be a part of the negotiations once it gets over there?
Well, it's brought up on the House side last week. I had a lot of concerns about it, Nick. I just think we cannot go and take people's Second Amendment rights away, for law-abiding citizens who've done nothing wrong. There are also some red flag laws and some other things in that legislation that I and the majority of people in the big first did not agree with. So I voted no to the package last week. Now a handful of negotiators are on the Senate side saying they've come up with a framework. Until you see the text and really know what's in it, it's really hard to comment either way, though I'll certainly be voting against it if it's something that increases red flag laws or takes away Second Amendment rights of law-abiding citizens. And
the bottom line is, as long as it's any different from what passed, it has to come back to you guys, right?
That's correct. So it would have to, the Senate will have to work. It often takes them longer, just how their rules and floor time is set up. So we'll see what they do with that this week as that gets turned into a bill and is considered, and then we'll see if it gets kicked back to the House side of the legislature here next week or sometime later this summer.
Sure. So there have been a lot of things you've been working on. Earlier this month, though, you and over 100 of your colleagues sent a letter to the SEC talking about a new proposed rule that could really hurt ag producers. Can you explain that a bit?
Yeah, basically the SEC, the Securities and Exchange Commission, has a rule that they're putting forward that would require all companies, agriculture included, to report on their impact of their industry or their particular business to the climate, to climate change. This is kind of in line or similar to ESG scores if people are following that. And I'll tell you, Nick, this would be devastating for agriculture. It would add a lot of burdens, a lot of red tape, a lot more. It just makes it harder for ag producers to do what they do best, and that's feed, fuel, and clothe the world.
So, I guess this is part of what you all in Congress argue about to a certain degree, is that sometimes the authority that you all should have ends up going to some administrative rule of some kind, whether it be the USDA or the SEC or the EPA or any of the rest of the alphabet soup that you and I know what they mean, but listeners might not. If there really does need to be changes, and we can argue whether or not there does, isn't that something Congress ought to deal with?
I wholeheartedly agree, and it's really important for people to understand that some of these policies and these things being pushed forward by the administration, it's not coming through or even being considered by, certainly has not been passed by Congress. It's these regulatory agencies that are doing what they're doing. Nick, to your point, I feel like the last really couple decades, we've seen the powers of the executive branch increase and the powers of the legislature of Congress decrease. And I believe the Founding Fathers intended the opposite. They intended for a relatively weak executive branch, but a very strong Congress, legislative branch, that was much more directly accountable to the people. But we've seen the reverse of that the last couple of decades, and it is not a good thing for the country, in my view.
Well, and that it becomes even more difficult when you represent the type of district that you do, Tracy, which is generally speaking rural. But generally speaking, again, the people that get up into these administrative agencies end up being people from the urban side, whether it is a Donald Trump or a Joe Biden or whomever it might be. And then just because that's where the votes are and that's where people then think the expertise is. So how do you deal with trying to get the interests of rural America into the minds of these regulators if it isn't going to come back to Congress?
Yeah, great question. Something we're working on, thinking about pushing into every day. My job is to advocate for agriculture and our conservative Kansas values, which in many respects have been lost in other parts of the country. So how do we do that? a whole host of things. It's putting forth the right legislation. It's also providing oversight to the bureaucracy and to these regulations that are going into place. It's speaking out against them. It's finding them out, identifying them, pushing back against them. It's holding hearings. There's a whole host of things that we're constantly doing to prevent what you're describing from occurring or continuing to occur and trying to decrease them from occurring as much as they are.
Tracy, heard on the news this morning that the national gas price average has eclipsed $5 a gallon. I believe AAA said it was $5.01. I know there's not a lot that Congress can do to raise or lower that just because of markets, but how does it impact the industries and the people that you serve? It seems like it's a double-edged sword for agriculture because input costs get so high, but also commodity prices are going up as well because of other overseas stuff. What do you see on balance?
Yeah, well, on balance, I think we got to realize how we got where we got, and that's this war on fossil fuel is going to result in less supply. When demand doesn't change, then you have upward pressure on prices. So this is a direct result of this war, this nonsensical war on fossil fuel and really liquid fuel. The answer is below our feet. It is growing in our field. So what we need to do to get out of this. Now, to your point, I mean, dramatically increases the price fuel rate at the pump, which is hard for folks. It also is really bad for agriculture. We are seeing farm input price. We're seeing the price of fertilizer, Nick, which is many times based on fossil fuel, increase 300, 400%. So commodity prices are very high right now. But when you quadruple the price of fertilizer and other inputs, it's all about the margin and what you actually take home. And we're putting our ag producers, the best in the world, in a really bad spot right now.
So, I mean, I guess what can people do? Is there anything to say, okay, we want other than reducing usage? Is there anything at all that we can do to let you know of ways to advocate on the margins for this? Things like the RFS, which I know they've been working on. I don't know. What's the policy implication here?
Yeah, well, a lot of things that can be done. I think for folks to make their voice heard to all their elected folks in office in Kansas, but also around the country, is incredibly important. This is in a large degree, this is a result of the policy choices that have been made. We need to make it easier for our oil and gas producers to drill new wells. We need to do away with these bogus and horrible ESG scores that make it hard for our fossil fuel, our domestic or our independent oil and gas producers to oftentimes to access credit. We need to increase ethanol production. We need to change the regulation so that's easier to do and that can be sold. There's no reason we're not doing E15 year-round. There's a whole host of things that we can do. We need to finish the Keystone XL pipeline, that would bring low-cost crude into our country from Canada. President Biden walked away from that. There's a lot of things, Nick, that we can do, should do. Not doing those is what's put us in this bad spot that we're currently in.
How much of this, though, is ultimately the administration's decision to do or not do, either because Congress has ceded that authority to them, like we talked about earlier in the conversation, through these regulatory agencies, or simply because they're stretching their hands out a little bit further and not being pushed back against?
Yeah, well, we are pushing back against it as best we can. The administration, though, hasn't fully acknowledged how much they've exacerbated and to a large degree caused or inflamed this problem. And they need to. It makes no sense, Nick. President Biden comes into office and immediately kills the Keystone XL pipeline, bringing in low-cost crude from Canada, our allied neighbor to the north. Meanwhile, we send money and support finishing the Nord Stream 2 pipeline, taking oil from Russia to Europe, which strengthens and emboldens Putin. This is 180 degrees opposite of what we ought to be doing.
Talk about the Farm Bill process. Where are we since the last time we talked?
Yep. So, the current Farm Bill, these are typically 5-year bills. The one we're currently under expires next September. So September of 2023. So we're about 16 months away from that. And the Ag Committee, is starting to talk about it. I've been going to the floor every week. In fact, I'll do it again this week, I believe, going to the floor and giving what I call the Farm Bill Impact Series, talking to other members and really trying to raise the profile of this Farm Bill to make sure that we get it right. With the committee, I've been very frustrated with the leadership of the committee. Has not had, on the House side, has not had hearings, has not been out listening to people nearly to the extent that needs to be. This needs to be a producer-centric farm bill to make sure it works for rural America.
We've heard rumblings, but I don't know how serious this is, that the USDA may try to tie school lunch funding, which is at least tangentially related to the Farm Bill, I'm not sure if it's a direct part of it, to making sure that policies are LGBTQ friendly in schools. To whatever degree you can, what do you know about that? Is that a serious threat or a serious thought in policy change? What have you heard?
Yep. So something we're following very closely. So far it's just been an article and a press release. When I saw that, infuriating. And so right now in our team, we are watching very closely. Next step is the administration. The USDA would write what's called a rule that would determine how this would potentially roll out. And then from there, we will work to fight against it and make sure that it doesn't happen. We can do it legislatively or a host of other ways. Given the timing, Nick, we're already mid-June. Likely we would be looking at not this, but the next school year. So, going to impact next summer, it seems. That's kind of reading the tea leaves. But something we are very concerned about, watching very, very closely, and we're ready to pounce in and push back in a very aggressive way if the administration tries to do this.
All right. And again, is there any relation between that part of what the USDA does and the Farm Bill? Is there any way you could put something in that bill, especially if Republicans get control back of the House?
Yeah, most certainly. In the Farm Bill, USDA and ag policy oversees food nutrition programs, school lunches, various things. So absolutely those things are connected and potentially could be tied together in this year's negotiation for the Farm Bill.